Hello everyone, I hope you're well. Today I'm going to review my August book club pick, which was The Grown Up by Gillian Flynn. I picked this one because I hadn't read anything from this author and her stuff is really hyped and it's just a short novella, so I thought it'd be a good kind of taster into her work. I'm gonna review this, like give you the plot, give you my opinions, and then get onto your opinions because you left so many great comments about this book. So first up, just the plot. It's about a woman who works as a sex worker, but where she works as a sex worker, upstairs is kind of like a fortune telling place. So she pretends to be a fortune teller and a medium as well. And a woman comes into the fortune telling place one day and says, "I think my house is haunted, something's going on." So our main character says, "Oh well, I'm a medium, I'll come and sort it out." So she goes round to this woman's house and she gets a weird vibe in the house, and even though she knows she's a complete fraud, she doesn't have the sixth sense, she does get a weird vibe in the house. That's all I'm gonna say. It's not a ghost story, it is just a thriller. My opinions, what was the end? Didn't like the end at all. Whilst I was reading this, I found it really intriguing and interesting, and I was really kind of devouring it, and then it got to the end and I just think that is so unrealistic. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, but you would turn your car back around is all I'm saying. When at the very end, when everything was revealed, you'd be like, "I'm sorry, what? Let me turn my car back around, let's go straight to a police station." That's what you do. You wouldn't want to be near him, you'd be a little bit afraid of him and what he was going to do. You would just report it as soon as you can, file a complaint. Like, that would be it. And you'd have to say, yeah, I was working as a fraud, but I don't think you'd get prison time for working as a fraud compared to what like he's done and the manipulation that he's doing. I didn't like the end. I didn't think it was believable. So for me, it kind of let down the book. I'm now going to put up on the screen your pictures, and you had different versions of the book than I did. I really liked the one with the white cover. I thought that was a really gorgeous addition. And now the time has come to read your reviews. So now it's time for your reviews. I have my laptop here and I'm just going to get straight into it because I've got loads to get through. So first up, It's a Mum Thing says, "I have to say I'm a bit biased. I have a love-hate relationship with Gillian's books. The story follows a psychic woman who gives bleeps in the back of a shop. She is a con artist and comes across a disturbed woman who says her life is falling apart because her stepson is a menace. She brings a psychic to her Victorian spooky house and discovers all sorts of messed up things. My only problem with it is that it's unfinished. I refuse to accept the end as an ending itself." I agree, it does feel very unfinished, the end, and it's very much left on a cliffhanger, and so you kind of feel like, oh. And one thing I will say about this is this was never supposed to be a novella. This was written for a short story collection, and then the publishers decided to bring it out as a novella. I think it's, in a short story collection, you read it and be like, oh, that's interesting, next story. But to be a novella, I just don't think it works in that same sense, so I totally agree with you there. Next up, we have a comment from Sarah Hall. "I was really impressed with how she created a world in such a small amount of pages. I wasn't sure if it was a ghost story or a mystery, which I actually didn't mind. I quite liked the ambiguity of the story and the ending. I must admit, I did feel like it was an exercise to something bigger, like she was building a plot and characterization and situation for something bigger. I wanted to know more about the character of Miles, and what he was really there was ambiguity about that. I did like it, but I think it needed more depth. I want the sense of dread and turmoil, which I didn't experience, but I think I would have done with more story. I'm definitely interested in reading more from her." 100%. It felt a bit unfinished. It felt like it didn't have that much depth. Miles is the woman who's saying my house is haunted, her kind of troubled stepson. And we didn't really get to know much about Miles, to be honest with you. And considering like he ends up being the main part of the story, I didn't feel like it had that much depth either. So I'm on the same page as you. It's almost like an unfinished work. Then we have Jaja Amaya of Words and Coffee. "I don't know how to explain how this book made me feel. I have mixed emotions. It was a quick read. I just couldn't help and wonder if there was really something wrong with the house. Miles to me seemed like a troubled teenager who just wanted to be out of the house, which he could have done all by himself. He didn't really need to have an elaborate plan. I didn't really feel attached to the characters and the storyline to make me want to read on, but I felt like there was no ending to it. It didn't satisfy me. It left me with a small hole in my mind. I honestly thought it was going to have like a shocking revelation, but it didn't. Overall, it was an okay book. I agree, we're all saying the same thing. The ending just felt so flat. And like I said, as a short story in a short story collection, fine. It was with other people's short stories, cool. But the publishers, I feel like they're just like, Gillian Flynn is so successful, let's just bring this out as a novella, like a cash cow book. But it didn't have the substance behind it to make it stand out as a novella. So I feel like we're all saying the same. It felt really unfinished. I then have a comment from Graham Siller Reads Books. I am positive I've already read this one when it first came out, but actually can't remember. The story did seem vaguely familiar, but even if it was a reread for me, it was well worth it. It literally only took me an hour to read from start to finish. So twisty and turny. I appreciate this is not a word, but it tells the story of a hooker, fortune teller, and some strange going on in a rather weird family. Story about a con artist having the tables turned on her and being one at the receiving end of manipulation. It was such a page turner, I just couldn't stop reading it. So much tension built up, and I really enjoyed the fake story about the previous family who were seemingly murdered in the house. I would definitely recommend this 67-page novella. It is at first a spooky haunted house ghost story, then it morphs into something completely other end of the spectrum. You almost don't see the twist coming. Great choice for the book club. I'm really glad you enjoyed it, Graham. And it's interesting that you didn't realise that you had read it before, because I had quite a few comments of people saying, I think I read it at the time, but people don't seem to remember that they read it until they start like getting well into the book. But like at 67 pages, she does build up a whole story, a whole world. I then have a comment from Sorcerers and Sorcery. I am on the fence with this one. I really like the build-up of the spooky atmosphere regarding the house and the stepson, but it's torn down so quickly it almost leaves you feeling whiplash. I will say the first page was the last thing I expected to read. In the start of the book, oh my god, don't. I went back to see my mum and I said, oh, this is the book I've chosen for my book club that I run on my YouTube. And she was like, okay. And I hadn't read the first page, and it's very sexual, the first page. And she started reading the first page aloud in front of me and my dad, and I was like, oh no. And she was like, yeah, this is what everyone's going to be reading, Hannah, that you've recommended. And I was like, oh my god, no one mentioned that first page. It's so embarrassing. I really wish more was done with the haunted house experts and the former family who lived in the house. It does hook you in and keeps you reading until the end, but I didn't feel like the book really ended, it just stopped. Overall, it's a 3-star book for me. I agree, 3 stars out of 5. It's an okay kind of book. It doesn't really have everything you want within it because there's questions unanswered, but like it does keep you entertained whilst you're reading it. 3 stars. All Tomorrows said, I'm not used to writing reviews, that's totally fine. I've listened to the audiobook and realised halfway through that I've read it in an anthology when it first came out. The first time I read it, I loved it, but the second time did not hold up. The ending was great, but the haunted house story was not very convincing, and it could have been more elaborate. It's a good story, but not very memorable. Since it took me 40 minutes to realise I've already read it. Yes! So many people were like, I think I've read this. I think I've read it. I'm not going to join in the book club because I think I've read it, but I'm not sure. And it's interesting how people, like, it's not that memorable a story that seems to stay with you. I then have a comment from Another Page. I loved this short story. For some reason, I thought it was going to be a full novel like her other works. I think it has a very good opening and it's very much in the tune of Gillian Flynn's signature voice. However, I didn't like the choose your own ending feel. It seemed not to know what kind of story it actually wanted to be. I read somewhere else's review where they compared it to the Clue movie's alternate endings. I liked all of the beginning and I was just there for the first 2 twists, but I wish it just left it at that. I'm glad I picked it up though because it's been on my TBR. I can't wait to see what next month's read is. Yes, I feel like we all had the same opinion, that it felt very fantastic wording, let me say, choose your own adventure. Do you remember those books where you used to read them and it was like, go into the dungeon, go to page 27, or turn back, page 6. It felt like that, like it was very open-ended, didn't really know what it was doing at the end. And I also agree with someone else's comment who said it felt like this was plotting out a bigger story. So almost like she'd written this to map out what she was going to write a whole novel about. I really did think it was like very open-ended, but I'm so conflicted because I really did enjoy reading it. I keep having flashbacks of being like, yeah, but Hannah, you really like devoured the book and loved reading it and you loved the writing and everything. But it was just the end really disappointed me. I'm going to end the video here. September's book club book, it's already been announced, but I'll announce it again, is Dracula by Bram Stoker. So go and read that with me if you would like to. I'm going to end it here and I'll see you again soon for another video.